Okay, so we're going to start off by cutting out the pieces based on the measurements given on the pattern. We've got one large rectangle for the back, and we've got the two smaller rectangle pieces for the back of the main placemat. So we're going to cut those out, and then along with the two rectangles for the back of your coaster. So we're going to start off with the main placemat. We're going to align the two side pieces right sides together against the longer edges. There we go, the longer edges of the placemat. So align those two long edges of the side piece and the main back panel piece, and align those raw edges together, and then you're going to sew those in place using a 1 centimetre seam allowance down the left hand side and then down the right hand side. So we're going to do that, but when we get to the right hand side, you want to leave a gap of maybe just 2 or 3 inches, just enough so that you can turn the placemat the correct way later on. So I usually put a couple of clips or a couple of pins to remind me to leave a little gap. We're going to do the same with the two back pieces for the coaster. You're going to align the two long edges right sides together, and you're going to sew that centre seam with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, but also again leaving a gap for turning the coaster later on. Okay, so right sides together, and then just sew that together on the sewing machine, leaving a couple of inches gap so that you can turn the coaster through later on. Okay, so you just need to press your seams open for both of those side seams that you've just sewn, and also for the back of the coaster. So you can see there's that little gap left in the middle. And then we're going to trace the outline of the placemat onto the back of our main fabric, so the fabric that you want on top of your placemat. So just pop the pattern piece onto the wrong side of that piece of fabric, and using a disappearing pen, just trace all the way around. Then once you've done one side, you're just going to flip the pattern piece over. So just make a couple of little dots so you can see where to lay it back in place. And we're going to trace, using your disappearing pen again, all the way around the edge of the other half of your placemat. Okay. Okay, so we need to trim around the edge of the scallop design that you've just traced, and it needs to be around about the same size as the piece that you've now got for the back of your placemat. So roughly cut around that, the area that you've just traced from the pattern piece, so that it's round about roughly the same size as that backing piece of fabric. I've sort of trimmed it near enough to the same size, but you don't need to be that accurate. So we're going to put the backing piece of the placemat right sides up, with the top part of the placemat on top of it right sides down. So we've got the two right sides facing each other. And I'm going to secure just with a couple of clips just to hold those two pieces of fabric together, as we're going to be going over to the sewing machine now to sew these in place. Okay, so you're going to be sewing all the way around the edge of the placemat. So the scalloped edge that you have already traced, we're going to be sewing directly onto that line. So take it slowly. There's going to be a lot of curves and a lot of moving around your sewing machine. So as you can see, what I'm doing to get around some of the curves, when my needle is in the down position, I'm able to lift the presser foot up and then move my fabric around without disturbing where the needle should be. So it's helping me pivot around those tight corners. I have sped this up now, so I don't expect you to go this fast, but as you can see, I'm doing this all the way around the placemat so that the two layers are sewn together, and even though it's sped up, I am actually taking my time to sew the curves and pivoting where I need to change direction as I'm sewing. So my needle's in a down position and I'm lifting the presser foot up just to manoeuvre myself around that placemat. Okay, so you're going to do this all the way around the edge, taking it nice and slowly, and then we have completed. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just cut around your sewing about 3 or 4 millimeters away from the edge of what you've just been sewing. Be careful not to snip into any stitches. We're just going to be gently cutting out your placemat all the way around, just like I said, just a few millimeters away from the edge of what you have just sewn. Okay, so before we turn the placemat the right way, we're just going to snip into each of those little points, and it just helps when we turn it the right way for everything to lay nice and flat. So just cut ever so gently into every single one of those points, making sure you don't snip through the stitches. Once you've done that, we're going to turn everything the right way around. And this takes a little bit of time. We've got lots of little lumps and bumps to be poking out. So using your fingers, just gently press all those curves out to the right sides out. Looks like I'm about to use a puppet or something. There we go. So I've turned it all the way out, and you can see there's that hole there. Just hand sew this back together and give everything a good press. Now, if you've got any pointy corners like I have there, I'm going to show you how to rectify this a little bit later. But for now, we're going to transfer the markings of the dotted line onto the front of the placemat. And this is giving us a guide to do some decorative stitching. So just fold down the top and one of the sides of the paper pattern, so that we're going to be creating a guide to be able to draw around. So I'm just folding the side and the top of the pattern piece down along those dotted lines, and then using the scallops at the bottom just to line up with the scallops of the actual placemat, so that I've positioned it in place. And now I can use a pencil, but not a white pencil, Nicola. I will get myself an erasable pen that I can actually see. There we go. That's my heat erasable pen. So I'm going to draw around the dotted line, patterned edge. And then I'm going to flip it over. Just make that little mark there. There you go. And line it up again with the scallops. So just making sure that's in place. And then I'm going to draw around the second half as well. So that's basically transferred that dotted line from the pattern piece onto the top of the placemat. And the best thing to do then is to grab yourself a ruler. So I use a Perspex ruler, and just transferring the markings from the placemat. I'm going to use that Perspex ruler just to draw everything up and make sure everything is nice and laid out properly, so that it's all level and I've got nice straight lines. So there we go. Using my heat erasable pen, I'm just going to draw that in place. Okay, so this is where we get to use one of those fancy stitches that your sewing machine might come with that we never really know what to use it for. But we're going to sew all the way around this rectangle line that you've just drawn. You can use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch, any stitch you fancy. But if you did want to do a decorative stitch, you can do this during this part of the sewing. And it really is just for decoration and to hold the two layers together. So I'm doing a little decorative stitch which is pre-programmed from my machine, and ta-da, there you go. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, if you've got any of those pointy corners which you didn't quite pull out properly, if you grab yourself a pin and just gently ease out some of those curves that didn't quite pop out properly when you turned it. So just gently ease it out using a pin, and then hold in place whilst you get your eye in and just press out those curves. So I did probably rush mine a little bit too much for the purpose of filming the demonstrations. Onto the coaster, trace the pattern onto the piece of stitch and tear, and then layer up your coaster as follows. The backing of the coaster goes at the bottom. Then you're going to put your top of your coaster, so the fabric you want to face up on your coaster, that's going to lie right sides together with the backing fabric. Then we're going to pop the piece of wadding on top of that. And then we're going to put the stitch and tear fabric on the top. So we've got everything layered together. We're then going to sew around, as we did before, the traced piece of the coaster. So we're going to sew on top of that. Once you've done that, grab your scissors and just cut into those points like we did before, just so that when we turn it all the right way out, everything's nice and neat and lays flat. Okay, so we're going to cut into each of those corners. And then once we've cut into those, just making sure that you stop a couple of millimetres away, you don't cut through the stitches. Once you've cut into those corners, we're going to cut around the corner like we did before with the placemat. So just leaving a few millimetres seam allowance as you cut around the edge of the coaster. Once you've cut all the way around, we're going to turn the coaster the right way out through the gap we left in the seam at the back. So as before, we're just going to gently push all of those curves through. It's a little bit easier doing the coaster because there's less of those lumps and bumps to push out the right way, but do take your time and use your fingers to push on the seams and get everything turned out nicely. Okay, so it's starting to take shape. There we go. Getting all those little corners and edges all pushed through. And hey presto, we nearly have a coaster. So once you've pushed all those little bumps out, I'm going to go over to the iron and give it a really good press. So just spend some time making sure you've pressed out all of the curves, and then you can sew that hole shut like you did with the placemat. Okay, so either trace or cut out the centre of the pattern piece for the coaster and just pop it on top of the top of your coaster. So this is the side that's facing up, and draw around it using that air erasable pen, because we're then going to go back to the sewing machine, and like we did with the placemat, you can either use a decorative stitch or a straight stitch. You're going to sew all the way around that circle just to finish off your coaster and hold everything together. And ta-da, there we go. There's your completed placemat and coaster with beautiful decorative top stitching, lovely pressed out scalloped edges, all ready for your Easter or springtime celebrations. Hope you enjoyed the project, and we look forward to seeing your makes over on our My Guilty Pleasure Facebook group. Thank you so much. Bye.